Welcome back to Free Founders, where we share actionable lessons from the world's best solopreneurs and small business owners. This is for aspiring entrepreneurs who want proven strategies to go from zero to first sale and onwards to scale and enjoy the freedom that comes along with it. My guest today is Andre Marquet. He has co-founded B3I and is CEO of Productized, an innovation firm focused on early stage startups in digital tech. He's a huge part of the Lisbon and I think Portuguese startup ecosystem, has been since the early days. We're going to talk about that later. In this episode, expect to learn, one, the power of starting your own conference and how that can superpower your entrepreneurial career. Secondly, why networking in person still matters. And thirdly, why Andre wants to make Europe great again. Welcome, Andre.
Thanks, Henry. Great introduction as well. Super bold.
Thank you. I want to start with a quote from you. You said in an interview recently, quote, "We need a true product revolution in Portugal." Why?
Because Portugal has been out of the economic system for 400 years now, right? I mean, it kind of started the capitalistic revolution in the 14th century with expansion and, lots of, lands that were in a way touched by the Portuguese maritime expansion that eventually spurred trade, specifically from European nations to, Americas and Far East Asia and Africa. We lost the Industrial Revolution as a country. I mean, it didn't really happen here. And then that means that we lost all subsequent industrial revolutions. So finally, I think we're kind of trying to run to get to the point where we want to have a more advanced economy that, in my opinion, has a lot to do with making productization a priority. And if you look to other countries out there, that's a little bit what they have done as well, or they're trying to do. So India specifically has an entire program towards make industry an important part of the Indian economy, because as you would expect, they are a very service-dependent economy. And Portugal the same. We are a very service-dependent economy. And the problem with that is that most of those services are very low, either low wage or low productivity services. So they do not represent a good economic model. And, the fact that a big chunk of our economy is actually dependent on tourism and other related ancillary services is also a testament to that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been reading, not to take the whole episode on a trajectory of Portuguese history, but even in the 1800s, there's like struggles to try and set up even just basic, looms and clothing factories by the Marquês de Pombal, just undermined by trends plus outside forces, including the UK, basically saying, no, import all of our stuff. You don't need to make anything.
The whole history of competitive advantage, right? The famous British economist, the David Ricardo, was the example he gave was actually the Portuguese economy and the British economy. He said that it's better for the Portuguese economy to keep exporting wine, and it's better for the British economy to keep exporting textiles to Portugal and wine to the UK, to the British Islands, than the Portuguese trying to produce textiles or the British trying to produce wine. Although with global warming, wine in Britain is getting better and better, and probably will keep so. But anyways, the whole economic theory would say that. But the point is, we did lost that train, so to say. We're trying to get it, and I think that product revolution needs to be done. Also, because there's so much talent now that we historically didn't have, right? So the Portuguese the population historically has been very under literated, but that is not the case nowadays. Obviously, you come here and realize so many people have engineering degrees, so many people are actually very highly educated, but you can only explore your full capacity, but you are upper sealed by the quality of the companies that can actually employ you in the local market. And that's why so many Portuguese have actually fled the country in the last few decades.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We'll just come on very shortly to the ecosystem and how it's evolved and how you've been a part of that. But I mean, I remember I was here 8 years ago with a remote job and looked at getting a job in Lisbon, and I was a UX designer at the time by
Mm,
trade. There was one job. There was one job that was anything vaguely tech product in an interesting product role of some sort. And I don't know how many applicants, but it would have been a huge amount. Salary was directly 25,000 or something
hmm
euros. Um, it wasn't there, and I think now that has shifted a lot, and you've been a big part of that. Let's talk about that because as I said before we recorded, I see you as this sort of Andre, this the connector, ecosystem builder. You're involved in events, teaching at the University Católica, the technical university. If anyone follows your LinkedIn, you're at everything going on in Portugal, conferences, co-working. It seems as an outsider, your mission is to sort of drag Portugal into the 21st century in terms of productizing it. Has that always been the case? Where did that journey?
hmm Yeah. So actually an engineer by training. I worked for engineering companies and telecom space for almost a decade. And in my late 20s, early 30s, I met a bunch of like-minded people. And the reason I met those like-minded people was because I decided to organize an event, right? I decided to organize an event as a way to talk about an agenda that I didn't see at the time that people were speaking about that agenda. So what eventually happened was that I applied to a TEDx license. I got that TEDx license and I did a TEDx event here in Portugal. Ended up being the very first TEDx event in Portugal of a sizable, sizable size, or so to say. So um, when we did that TEDx event, I got so much exposure to so many people because this was back in 2009, and that was all over the place, was all the rage. So everyone was trying to get close to it. So I just had this sheer luck of being the right place, the right moment, and having all this attention. So I met a lot of interesting people that otherwise almost for sure I wouldn't be able to meet. And one of these people I met was Pedro Rocha Vieira. He had just came to Portugal from a long backpack trip to South America. So he was also looking to do stuff. And we decided to start organize this group of friends. Really, it was no more than that. Around this idea of creating an entrepreneur hub here in Lisbon, very much in line to Y Combinator. So this again, 2009, Y Combinator was maybe 2 years old. We were very inspired by what they were doing in terms of startup acceleration there. And we thought, we have all this talent here. Maybe we can have a startup community, so to say. And that's essentially what started the Beta project, or Beta project, if you prefer. And that's how we started this community building um, association, which eventually led to the company that it is nowadays, 10 or 15 years later.
BTI now it is that ecosystem, right? It's co-working, it's events, it's training, as you said
Yeah, I mean,
before.
I think at BTI has been a lot of things during the time, mostly nowadays. So I'm not related to the company anymore, but I guess they are more of a corporate innovation agency more than anything else. They have also
Understood. Yeah.
expanded to Brazil quite successfully. And that's essentially what they are doing. But for the very first years, we were a community building company. So we were creating lots of events like the Techstars Startup Weekend, the very Y Combinator clones here in Portugal called Lisbon Challenge, which was actually modeled after the Mass Challenge in Boston. And and that's how we were attracting dozens, if not hundreds, of startups to be accelerated here in Lisbon for many years, at least in those initial years. And that was quite fresh. I mean, everything now seems quite obvious because the Web Summit is here, because, Lisbon has become a major digital nomad hub and so on. But 15 years ago, I can assure you, it was everything but obvious, right? So you would pitch this idea to, big companies here and people, or even politicians or anyone else. And people would basically say, you guys are demential. You probably deserve to go to the institution. There's nothing to be done in that aspect. So we were very much counter, the establishment. We were doing something that felt that we were very much in a bubble of like-minded people, but that was a very special moment, very special days that I really have a nostalgic feeling when I talk about those days.
If you're enjoying this episode and want to get each shiny new episode straight to whatever platform you use to listen to your podcast, please subscribe using the subscribe button below. Yeah, I think everyone does with the early days of a business. Just talk to me about your personal strategy, because I think it's something I'm thinking about at the moment. This sort of like, when community building in some way, or ecosystem building, I suppose, is the same thing, right? It's ultimately about people and getting them together to create some sort of magic. How did you think about going into that? Was it, oh, this is just exciting and I'm just going to see where it goes? Was there like a bigger strategy where it's, we'll talk about shortly, productized, I'm going to use this to put myself in this ecosystem and then leverage that to start conferences? Like, what was your narrative, your personal strategy there as an entrepreneur?
Well, to be honest, I don't think I had one, or at least not one that I was following. I like to think that I'm a very romantic kind of person. I do it because I feel it, or I do it because I think it's worthwhile doing, or because no one else is doing it. So, someone has to do it, and if it has to be me, there you go. And that was the reason that I also left TEDx. Right after the third edition, we went from one TEDx to an explosion of TEDx. We had, like, I don't know, dozens of TEDx all over the place. And I thought, there's really no point in keep doing this, right? Because it's there. Lots of people are doing it. So what am I adding to this game now? So that's the reasoning I do to lots of the projects that I'm involved. It's like, am I making a difference? And if the answer is yes, totally, because either you are the only one doing it, so when you are the only one doing it, chances are you're probably making a difference. Or when you have competitors, but they're still not there. But if you are in a very competitive space and lots of people are doing that already, it's like the market, it's already serviced, right? And if the market is already serviced, you are going to have a very small delta towards what the market is already offering for different reasons, right? It's very hard to compete in a very competitive market. So, and I try to get out of it, not going into that direction where I have a very competitive market, and then or if it happens, I see it actually has a graceful thing. A good end state, which is, hey, great. Now we have lots of people doing product management training, or lots of people doing product management conferences. This is awesome, because now there is a community. That community is thriving. That community is actually existent. And when I started, it was non-existent, right? And was I able to capitalize? Well, if I did, great. I didn't, at least the end state, which is a thriving community of either entrepreneurs, which is what I think we have now in Portugal, which we didn't 15 years ago when we started Batai, or product people, which we didn't do also 10 years ago when we started Productized. So that's a little bit how I see it. It's like, that's the definition of success. The definition of not success or failure is you're doing this and everything is still reliant on you, and you have not really been able to create a community. So if for some reason you go away off the market, the market becomes orphan. There's nothing else to substitute you. I'm not saying that's the case. Luckily, I don't think that's the case. I think if we would just disappear, the situation will not be like, oh, there's no product conferences anymore. I mean, lots of people would probably take this space. Although in terms of the actual conference space, it's a little bit more complex because, as you know, there was COVID. And during COVID times, lots of good conference organizers actually went down. And even in very well-established product community geographies like London and so on and so forth. So we are 2022, 2023, pretty much from scratch. So we went through this nuclear apocalypse where there was nothing going on for 2 years, maybe 3 in some cases, to, okay, let's rebuild the community. Let's go back IRL. Let's start to go to conferences again. And I know the historical perspective is always hard to remember, but 3 years ago, people were saying conferences are over.
Yeah.
Digital will be forever the solution. No one will travel anymore. Obviously, that did not happen. But yes, you have to have a lot of resilience to, or you have to.
I want to really dig into that, the journey with Productized shortly. But I'm just coming back to, you raised a point that just really resonated with me, and I think is important for other entrepreneurs to hear, which is this natural evolution of not just a business, but I think you as an entrepreneur. So, I was resonated with me because I've been doing product MBA for 4 years, right? Product management training. 2020, there was a nice wave just starting, that sort of online education really becoming a thing, online boot camp. So, I was riding that wave, lots of people suddenly doing it. And I think I could have, really stayed 100% committed to that business, pushed on and, tried to double down on the differentiation of being like very hands-on and actionable. But for me personally, I took a step back and asked, I think, quite a similar question to you, which was that, the market is service. There are good solutions out there. Right? I think there's a place for product in that world of product management training. But for me personally, like, where am I going to get maximum leverage? Right? Where am I going to really maximize my own impact? It's got to be doing something else now, because the market service, it's different than it was 3-4 years ago. Just from a personal mission perspective, I don't think you're going to find fulfillment when you are one of many, firstly, and then second, obviously from a business perspective, as you say, if you're not able to hyper differentiate and really create your own category of product, then it's just going to be a struggle. It's just going to be harder to get sales, harder to reach profitability, harder to grow. And it's very, talking from experience, it is scary to go, I've got this good thing going, but I'm going to take another direction. But I think it is just a necessary step to take for most entrepreneurs. I think, like myself, most people probably just delay and delay and delay, or never take that step, and then find themselves sort of trapped by their own business in a way. So I thought that was a really, profound point, and what you said clarified something that I've been thinking in a very messy way recently. How did you, obviously, you're having a conversation, you meet the right person and sort of have this shared direction, which eventually became B2I. But how did you, in terms of revenue generation, right, covering your own costs, for example, how did you think about the kind of risks or mitigate the risks?
Yeah, so when we started with a very, very lean structure. So for the very first year or so, I was not even an employee of Betai. So we started as no one was actually employed by the structure. And I've used the proceedings of the second TEDx event. So we had maybe 10,000 euros in profit to fund the very first year of Betai. So we used that money to pay a little bit of expenses. And then Pedro is a super connected person here in Portugal, although he has been living in the US for 2 or 3 years now. But back then he knew pretty much everyone, right? And Portugal has that. I think that's actually an advantage, which is a fairly small country. So you can get to know pretty much everyone that counts if you actually move yourself. And he did. So we ended up pitching this to lots of companies, lots of local. And because again, we were one of the very first people pitching them, this was new. It's like, oh, you want to do what? Startups? What is that? Okay. You know what? Do we have anyone doing this already here? Nah, I don't think we do. Okay, let's give, I don't know, 15K to this guy to promote this, right? Either has a sponsorship or has some kind of deal with
Just be really
services.
specific there. Who are you approaching to
So
get that funding?
one of our biggest sponsors in the very first years was Caixa Geral de Depósitos, the bank. So they are a public owned bank here in Portugal, and they happen to be the Portuguese biggest bank. And yeah, and I think they kind of trusted us for a while. And then we approached also pretty much everyone. Like I was telling you, we had, I don't know, dozens of meetings per week. Lots of no's, as you would expect, but I think that's part of the job. You have to go and you have to pitch and you have to try to sell them this vision of, oh, let's create this startup ecosystem here in Lisbon, da 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 da. Very hard pitch to not just to sell, but also to evangelize and to explain, right? There was a whole evangelization phase that we have to go through. So the very first few years, a little bit like with Productized, it was all about evangelization. And I felt that when I created Productized 5 years later, that I was going through the whole same thing again, because I was having meetings and people say, project manager. No, it's product manager. Oh, but why you want to do project man? No, it's like product. Product has digital products or products. Like it was a very strange conversation, because at the end of the meeting, I was still feeling that, no, I don't think they even get what I'm trying to do here. But anyways, things have changed.
Where does that resilience come from? Because most people would give up super quickly, right? They'd pitch. I've coached aspiring entrepreneurs where they will pitch to one person, they don't get a sale or positive feedback, and then that's like, they're done. How did you just keep going? Do you think that was the mission? Is it some sort of resilience you built?
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I think each person has their own traits, and the psychology of it is very hard to explain, especially in by oneself. But I would say that sometimes having the one yes that makes the difference, makes a lot of difference. So you feel very motivated by that one yes. That's also a very dangerous thing to do, especially if you're building product. If you're building a service company like we are, again, we're not a product company, right? We are a conference business, educational business. We're not really doing any product other than maybe the intellectual property. But having the single yes, it gives you a false indication of a market fit, right? But if you are a service company, you can adjust very quickly. Actually, part of the problem of being a service company, right, is that you give up on your thesis very quickly, because you adjust just, okay, what do you want? Oh, you want me to do this? Fine. 3 balls instead of 2, 3 balls. There we go. And you start juggling according to whatever the dance or the music is. And I think that's also the difference maybe between those founders tend to be more product focused. And that's where I think the resilience of going out there and having a thesis and hearing no's and being able to pivot to a better thesis is so important. Yeah, but it's a super hard thing to do. Also, because when you have one of these theses, you tend to think about your startup thesis, project thesis has your baby. So hearing one no, it's devastating. Like, oh, they don't like my baby. Why? My baby is so beautiful. I'm not going to speak with people anymore because they're going to say my baby is ugly, right? So that's this defensive mechanism that I think it's very natural, because again, this baby metaphor is ingrained in our brain. So you just had a baby. I know you have a son. I have 3 kids. So nobody likes to be told your sons are badly behaved or they're ugly, whatever there is. I mean, you feel it has a personal attack when it's actually not, right? It's just that specific concept does not really work for me, but if you come up with something else, maybe it does.
Yeah, I have luckily had my first business backtracker. So it was like an investment back startup, the goal to sort of scale this huge thing, and just, oh my God, ego running away with myself, and also people telling us like we should raise 1 million and we should go and do this and that. And luckily I reflected well after that experience when it failed and just saw that I've been not engaging with deep feedback. Like I do user interviews or user testing, but not questioning the core assumptions and thesis and deflecting from that. And I think luckily it failed, and I was able to then see, okay, well, that's the consequence of not really listening to people, not really questioning assumptions. But
Yeah.
I think people are very good at, as I was, right, hiding
Yeah,
your ego from those
to your point,
realities.
Andre, I think that the educational service. I mean, we spend a good chunk of our lives going through classes, and then we go to uni, and they never really teach you about this aspect of preparing to fail and preparing to pivot and preparing to failing fast and moving forward. And so this is very orthogonal to what you're being told in school, which is preparing for success, preparing for achievement. If you study, you get the mark and you move on towards the next class and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
It's
that's the
always
thing.
very
The
linear.
moving on to just something different. So it's very true. You optimize for this one subject.
Exactly.
You have one go at writing the exam, and that's it. And then you're done. There's no, okay, here's the thing that you could improve upon and go and iterate or evolve an idea in a certain way. Well, yeah, we could talk about the failure of formal education for hours.
Yeah, I didn't want to take us that way, but I think it's just a consequence of why this entrepreneurial mindset is so difficult for basically everyone, because everyone that goes to formal education, which is basically 99% of people out there nowadays, they're just not formally prepared to the kind of skill sets and yeah, and what you need to have to become a successful entrepreneur. So
I
you
think
have to
even beyond,
rewire your brain, really.
but I think that's the key point, right? Is it's not even. I think the skills people can learn. Right? You can learn. Okay, here's common business models that you could use for your business idea, or here's what product strategy is and how to apply it to your idea. But it's the psychological preparation which I think is really lacking. How do you handle someone saying your idea is rubbish? Or how do you handle someone just blanking you, ignoring you, right? Because they don't want to be rude and say no to you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you detach yourself emotionally and make objective decisions? I think that's the big thing. I mean, this is what I wrote at your book, Product Leadership Starts With You, about 5 years ago on this. The fact that if you want to be an effective product leader, that starts with you. Psychological foundations of being resilient, being able to look at things objectively, being able to really focus on just the essential rather than the infinite things you could do. I think it's true of product leaders. I think it's really true of anybody that operates in a space of uncertainty, such as a startup. I want to talk about your two. Well, I suppose we touched upon B2II, but you said one crash, one exit. Let's talk about the Valencia startups. It's the only tech startup you didn't work out too well. Tell us about that and how did it inform you later as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I learned a lot through that process. So I was leaving Bataille. I mean, after 5 years of working there and going from 0 to 1. I mean, we were flying. When I left, the company was making almost 1 million in revenue. So we were good. And I felt that the ecosystem had changed, right? So finally we had an ecosystem. Finally, we had lots of startups. Finally, we started to see some of the Portuguese unicorns that people are now talking about coming out of either that ecosystem or just giving their first steps. And I thought, oh, maybe this is the right moment to get out and maybe create my own startup company. So that's what I did. We met. We had like a small team. With one of the guys was the Portuguese guy that we had sent to Brazil to create Beta in Brazil back then. And when he came back, he told me, "Hey, I have this crazy idea that I met this Brazilian founder there. Do you want to join us?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Looks good." It was a fashion mobile payment solution. So it's basically Amazon Go, but for fashion stores like Zara and other stores like that. So you could just get into the store, and the idea was that you would pick and collect your fashion items and just leave the store just like that. and payment would take care of itself. So we had a working prototype. The problem with fashion store is that you have to deal with anti-theft technology is a big thing. So that's why you have all this anti-theft tags, and you have to be able to disable those anti-theft tags before you get out of the store. Otherwise, of course, the anti-theft system and the alarm will ring. So we developed the concept. It was a working prototype, and then we thought, oh, this is going to be an easy peasy sell to Inditex and all these fashion retailers, because it's kind of obvious they will want this, right? If it works and if it does what it's promising. And then we realized that they didn't, right? We went to Spain. Spain happens to be the biggest, one of the biggest, if probably not the biggest fashion hub in Europe nowadays in terms of gross selling, companies like Mango and Inditex Group and so on. And the people, actually, they were super nice with us, and they told us, yeah, your idea is crap. We don't want this. We're developing our own solutions, and we'll basically never buy this in our entire lives. No way, Jose. That's not the way to go. Also, because the queuing inside a fashion store it's not a liability. It's actually something they want to have, because the queue provides social indication of fear of missing out to whoever is watching the store. It's like, hey, maybe I'm missing out, especially for women. And we validated that with lots of extensive interviews. And we also realized that mostly women were willing to spend much more time queuing for fashion items than men. So we had this all-male founding team that was very non-empathetic towards the problem that we're trying to solve. And after a few months in Valencia, I realized, hey guys, this is not going to work out. We need to pivot. So and I was formerly the CEO. So we started flirting other ideas, and we did for a while. Eventually, one of those ideas got accepted at Startup Chile, another startup accelerator. I was waiting my first kid here in Portugal. I mean, my wife was, and I decided that I was not going to embark on that second journey of that second adventure to Chile, and I stayed here and eventually co-founded Productized. So that's how that startup crashed, and it crashed relatively quickly, right? I mean, from inception to selling my shares to my co-founders, I think I took maybe 6 months, but it was super painful because, again, it was not because they told me the baby was ugly. It was not even my idea, right? It was because it didn't work out as a team. It didn't work out as a concept, and it didn't work out because I wanted to show that I could do it, right? Doing this for 5 years, telling other people, how they can be entrepreneurs, and then when you finally do it yourself, and I was reading all the books, back then, 2009, 2010. So all the startup mantra books were being launched every week, right? The Lean Startup. And, it was this Cambric period where everybody was suddenly starting to talk about startups. So there was a lot of interesting literature coming out back then, the business model generation book by Alex Osterwalder and so on and so forth. So I thought, I know all the theory. What am I missing here? And I failed quite spectacular to my own ambitious projection, which was, yeah, for sure, we're going to raise some money. For sure, we're going to at least survive a couple of years. So, but no, it didn't happen that way.
It's, I think that people need to be aware of the failure rates of, even if you have just an absolute all-star team and some sort of competitive advantage, like there's just a high percentage chance of it. Like, you can mitigate risk in certain ways. You do your product discovery up front, test your business model early, but it's however much experience you have, you're likely to fail. This is partly why I'm embarking on this building 12 startups in 12 months journey, because you just don't know which
go on.
Yeah, and because of the failure rates, let's say 10 would probably be a better number. Say build 10, 9 of them are probably going to fail. Right? They're not going to hit some sort of concrete success metric.
And I think that's a great approach, because you have set up the failure rate as your...
It's baked in. It's just baked into the process. So
exactly.
Yeah, I'm not going to get to product 2 and go like, oh shit, I'm going to give up, because it's just try 12, see what happens with it.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. Expectation
we'll
is
see.
really no. I mean, what I'm saying is that expectation is really the mother of all fuck ups, right? So if
100%.
your expectation is, oh, I'm going to do 12 startups and maybe 10 are going to fail, and you actually get 3 to work out, you're going to be really happy because your expectation was 10 are going to fail, and then suddenly only 9 failed. If your expectation is, I'm going to do this one startup and it has to work out and then it fails, then you put all your eggs in the same basket and you lost. You feel this, and because people have loss aversion, you feel such a big loss. So I think it's important to really have this thesis that this might actually fail. So if you just do this, chances are this is going to fail. So better have like 1 or 2 concepts that you were working on, and or even more, and let that, like you said, bake in the failure rate into the process, because that is going to be psychologically easier to deal with.
Yeah, and there's actually something I've been coaching entrepreneurs this year, and the first time sort of doing it formally, paid work, and I've realised that quite quickly. I mean, part of the ideation process I go through with them is like, let's get at least 20 problems written, because each of those will lead to 2 or 3 possible solutions. But it's also, I think, the managing the psychological side, which is, okay, let's try and end up with 3 quite concrete business ideas. But I think of it like a revolver, right? You have 3 bullets ready to go. Try 1, you could even try 2 at the same time. If the first one doesn't work, go into the second one. If it doesn't work, go into the third one, right? Try and get some signal, and then, persist if you see signal from the market, but pivot very quickly if you're not getting that signal. Because I've noticed that and in myself as well, historically, right? You try some big idea you're excited about, it doesn't work, and it's really deflating. It can take, the backtracker for me failed about 2014. Realistically, it took me probably 3 years until I started sort of back in that entrepreneurial journey.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, if my mindset was different, I probably would have gone straight into another business. So yeah, psychological side comes up again as particularly important. How did you think that? So that was your only tech startup. How do you think that shaped? We'll talk about Productized. In terms of how you thought about starting your next business, like, what did you take away from that experience? Also from TEDx, from B2I. What kind of your beliefs, philosophies there?
So Productized was actually in the shelf for a few years. We're a friend with this guy called James.
So specifically Productized, the conference.
Yes, even with the same name, Productized. And that's because when I was working as a young engineer for companies here, I understood that they had this very service-oriented mindset, and they had amazing engineering skills, they had amazing solution building capabilities, but they were never thinking about productizing, right? They were always on this bespoke contracts of developing for X and then developing for Y. It's like, why are you doing this? I mean, this product can be sold to dozens of companies at least, and why are you just giving away all this labor out for such a small fee, really, and not really productizing and making the whole hard process of trying to raise, I don't know, money, or trying to actually sell to other clients. So I had this idea of creating this productize it, whatever it was called back then, in the shelf since 2011, 2012. So when I came back to Portugal, I came back to my ideas drawer and I took it from the shelf, and this was one of the ideas I put on the table. I had a couple of other ideas that I wanted to explore, including tech startups. But I think it was this indication, right? So I started talking with people about it, and they were telling me, "Oh, that's a real problem. You might want to do something about it." And that's what eventually happened. It's cost of opportunity. And that's something most people don't realize in their life, that cost of opportunity of one average idea is going to take out potentially good ideas, right? So what I'm trying to say is that obviously Productized is not a $1 billion idea. It's a service concept. It's a conference, it's an events, etc. It's a community. But that's what happened this universe, right? Maybe in another universe, another path, I might have chosen differently, but I decided to go with this one. And the cost of opportunity, then, it's huge, because if you commit to make it successful for a longer run, you end up staying on that project for many years. And I guess that's
Right,
something
particularly
you
with
can relate with
conference.
because you are doing that with product MBA. And if you have a project that people kind of resonate with you, you are the brand, and the brand is a little bit yourself as well. You are going to have lots of second thoughts about leaving that project and go do something else, because you don't want to leave that community orphan, or you don't want to feel like you're giving up on it and doing something else, which again, and that something else is also a risk, and that something else is also something you don't know it's that's necessarily better than what you're doing at the moment. So that's the fine balance of choices, which is hard. So that's why I really love this concept that you're doing now of this 12 ideas in 10 months or whatever it is.
I love that concept, by the cost of opportunity. But how did you? Because there's a cost of opportunity doing any business, right? But the difference is, say, if I launch a no-code startup, I mean, I can do Break Free, for example. I got zero, literally from idea to, I think we got about 20,000 euros, the whole thing within 7 days. The difference, and probably the reason I haven't gone all in it is just distribution and not finding sort of repeatable sales with it. But with the conference, it's a way bigger cycle. You know, you eventually got 300 people to the first conference, which is amazing. But you know, I imagine it's pretty scary going, I've just had my first child, or just about to. I'm coming off the failure of this previous startup. I'm now going to commit to this thing, which like could, even if it does work out, payday is going to be, I don't know, 6 months time. Like, why did you choose that specific idea? Was it just like really strong signal? What was your decision-making process there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think it was a very rational decision. Irrationality plays a big part of your decisions in life, and that's actually the entire thesis of Portuguese neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, right? It says people tend to make lots of irrational decisions, and irrationality is pervasive in human nature, not necessarily rationality in terms of the brain against heart. So it was a little bit like I told you, this more of romantic idea that we should do this. It was the right time, and then also the fact that I didn't want to be seen as a failure, right? I'm committing to do this, and then I'm after 3 or 4 months I'm not doing it anymore just because it's difficult, or because people are not showing up, or because I'm not getting enough sponsorship. So I decided this first one I'm gonna do it no matter what. Again, the problem is it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You do the first one, and after the first event, especially a conference, if it's mildly good, it doesn't necessarily need to be top good. If it's mildly good, people will tell you, because people are excited, and this, you have to be very cautious with this. People give you this idea that, oh, this was such an amazing event, you should do it again. And I really felt that I learned a lot, or, you know, I met like-minded people, da 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 da. And then you have this responsibility on your shoulders, which is, do you do it again at your own cost of having to move this mountain again, and eventually cost of opportunity that implies, or you just leave it like that and you move on to the next chapter? And I decided to do the second one. And of course, you're excited yourself because you feel the vibe, you feel the energy, you feel that, oh, doing something meaningful. People are coming to you and they're telling you that this was good for them. So do you understand that unless you are a psychopath, it's not really an easy thing to go for and say, oh yeah, done, check, now I'm going to do something else. You'd be a little bit erratic if you had that kind of behavior. So one leads to the other, then you have two comes 3, and then it's a business. Now it's 4 and 5, and here we are, the 9th edition this year. That said, 10 years, it's a long time. We're heading towards the 10th edition, and for the future, I'm definitely considering what's next. And Yeah, and this might actually sound a little bit surprising because, of course, now the product community is much more developed than it was 10 years ago. So arguably, it's easier to do because it's easier to have a market. It's easier to have a constituency of people that are product managers and want to go to a product event, and also because the market has downsized a little bit after COVID in terms of offerings of product events out there in Europe. But yeah, I definitely think that we have done something. We have served the community, and also in terms of cost of opportunity for my life, I'm looking towards other directions and very open about it with the community. That yes, I think it would be really good if we do a 10th edition because it's a round number. I think it's a good finale to say, but then I'm not 100% sure that I'll be the person doing the events edition. So if it happens, great, and I really hope it does, but not necessarily with me at at the front of the event, either as an organizer or anything like that.
I definitely I want to come back to just tips and tactics around, because I think going from 0 to 1 is the biggest challenge, I think, for most entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. Not the, obviously it comes with challenges, but second, third, fourth, when you sort of got signal, you see, oh, there's something here, and you motivate, you're clear about it. But let's carry on that thread, because are you finding yourself asking the same question you did after the TEDx, which there's now, there's a market established, product conferences are now a thing, the ecosystem has evolved. Are you finding that you're asking yourself, like, where is my my leverage, let's say, that the area where I can really get most impact? And
not really. I don't think it's exactly the same. Also because with TEDx, you are a franchisee of TED, and the gradient of choice is less. Here we have our own brand. We can pretty much do whatever we want, right? Although when you have a brand where you have a product, there are expectations from the market, what you should be doing or not doing, right? So you are also constrained by the expectations. But I think the feeling is a little bit different. So right now, it's not because, oh, there's a market, so if we disappear, we'll be taken over, because I don't even think that's true, at least not here for Lisbon. But there are a number of good events out there in the UK and France and in Germany now. But there is space for everyone, right? It's like not like Europe is such a small space that in the hundreds of thousands of product managers out there, there's only space for 3 or 4 conferences. I think there's space for all of us, and especially one here in Portugal, because of where we are. When you do a conference in Portugal and Lisbon specifically, you're not just selling the training or the community, you're also selling the destination. People would come here and they have a good time and they spend a weekend, whatever it is. I think it's more about moment in life, right? Where I am, what I want to do next. And I think there's a couple of teams I'd really like to explore. And the cost of opportunity of doing those is super high. And the second is that I was never able to, and I'm going to say a big word, professionalize the event operation, right? So it has always been very much of a craftsmanship of myself doing pretty much everything. So I haven't been able to neither a flywheel of the conference serves, event serves, training serves something else, right? Consulting. So there's really no flywheel. So the conference it's a standalone. It lives for itself. I'm not getting any consulting gigs out of the conference myself, or not even training, to be honest. I don't think we have a flywheel in motion. And secondly, we don't really have a professionalized structure. So it's really great when you have an event like this and you're just providing, you're just the chairman, right? And people come to you, hey, Andre, should we invite this guy? Should we have Marty Kagan this year? Should we have Teresa Torres? I mean, and you're just giving some advice, but everyone else is taking care of everything else. Or you have someone in front of the structure that would be able to do that. And I did have tried to do that, but I think it's really hard. Again, I come to maybe product MBA again, because I think that the brand and the person kind of become one. So it's really hard to outsource this to any meaningful person that you trust to take care of the baby for you. I don't know if that resonates or makes sense to
100%.
what I'm saying
Yeah,
here,
I
but
think
that's really the hardmanship that I'm having. So so either I find someone to do it, or I sell it out, or I stop doing it. But I think those are essentially the three options, or I keep doing it. So right, so those are the four options. For 10 years, option has been I keep doing it. So I'm looking towards the three other options.
Yeah, I think there's something inherent about service-based businesses where, I mean, it is ultimately about human relationships, and you know, I've experimented with like getting other product coaches in to do a lot of the coaching work and workshop. It's not the same. You know, imagine, Andre, I've followed your career. We've been chatting for months. We then have active coaching, and then suddenly I'm like, here's some random person that's going to do this session with you. It just doesn't deliver the same value. Feels a bit disingenuous as well. Do you? Let's talk about conferencing as a solopreneur and a business. But what do you think? I suppose let's come back to starting a conference. Let's imagine, you know, we have someone listening, think you're starting your own business or running a business, and they go, right, they're thinking of starting a conference. First question, how important do you think it was that you had that existing network, access to ecosystem to get Productized going? Secondly, any tips and tactics for somebody getting started, like running their first conference?
Okay. So first question, I don't think it was super important that I had the network I did. I've seen kids, 19-year-olds, so I've actually mentored kids, 19-year-old kids, start conferences from scratch, and they were quite successful. And they had zero network, they had zero leverage. They were just coming out of high school, and still they did it and did it well. If you are a hustler, if you move, if you ask, I mean, we live in many ways in the best of times to become or to be an entrepreneur, right? I mean, everyone is literally reachable on LinkedIn, with a few exceptions, but even those, right? This was not possible some years ago. It is now, right? So if you actually move, and if you are very motivated, if you are very willing to do what it takes, there's nowadays having the Rolodex that used to be an asset, but I think it's becoming less and less of an asset. I think, of course, I mean, towards very specific relationships in very specific cultures, that's obviously an asset. In Western civilization, where everything is very transactional, if you have a value proposition, people listen, or they will be willing to at least trying to understand if they want to do business with you. Secondly, in terms of tactical advice for people trying to do conferences or going to conferences, this is a labor of love. So if your motivation is not making money or going into the conference business because of money, let me know, because I really want to get to know you.
What's the secret?
You might have a secret that I don't know, but I think it's a labor of love. So if you are in love with a specific topic, if you are really motivated to put on an agenda for a specific space that you think it's ahead, there's no voice where needs to be a community needs to be drawn towards. The first thing I think you should do is really to understand and validate the thesis. Are you going to make any difference? Are you going to be the first or the second event in that space, or are you just going to be the fifth or the 10th event in a space that is overcrowded with lots of good people out there? Secondly, go to one of these events. So chances are there are other events doing what you're trying to do. At least Google or at least ChatGPT is right. So, which is something I didn't properly do when I started Productized, I must say, because the product was already there. They had been doing that for 2 or 3 years. I think they started in 2014 or so. So at least go to one of their events and see if you like the event. And if the answer is yes, this is a perfectly fine event. It does pretty much everything I had in my mind. There's very little I can add here. And if the answer is yes, maybe there, you found your community. You don't need to create another one just because. If the answer is no, I don't really think this is surveying the community, or this is an old boring event. I would say speak with those people. Chances are it's maybe an older generation. They have been doing it for many years and they are either tired or they got old, and that happens, right? It's biology. So speak to them with them and try to offer your perspective. If they are smart, they will probably invite you to be part of their board of curators or part of the organization, really. I mean, most of the event organizers, not like, again, they're doing it in like Uncle Scrooge, right? They're doing it because they at least in the beginning, they love the community. They had this passion and somehow they lost it along the way. But if they found someone that is equally passionate as they were in the beginning, they will embrace that person. They will probably say, welcome, join us, help us make this better. And of course, if that doesn't happen because they are stubborn or whatever it is, then you might want to do it, right? If you are still thinking, oh, yes, this is the right thing to do, you do it. And then there's a lot of good tactical aspects, how to do and run an event out there, which Google will probably give a much better answer to you. But I think answering this specific hardly issues are the most important thing that you should try to do in the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, I mean, great advice. I think I always raise this point with anybody working in product, starting a business. Like all products at their core are the same thing, right? You have to discover a problem, ideally an acute problem. You then need to prove that the market is not servicing it in some specific way. If so, great. Well, let's go test something out and see what happens, right? It's the same for a conference. It's the same for a AI assistant, whatever it is. I think it's really good advice. I think there's loads of things I'd love to talk about, but we'll move towards a conclusion. Just some quick fire questions, Andre, before we wrap up. What one piece of advice would you give to an aspiring entrepreneur, somebody wanting to start their own business?
Well, do it. Again, like you said, try to find if that problem is not being solved already in a meaningful, interesting way. It sometimes is. Yesterday, I had a conversation with this girl from Romania, and she was like, oh, I want to do this platform for people that want to meet locals to give them like a view of the city. It's like, oh, there's a platform that does exactly like that. Do you know this platform called Show Around? And she was like, no, I don't. So you should. And it works in your city. I mean, she's from Cluj-Napoca, which is one of the big cities in Romania. I was like, oh, check it out and try it out. See if this is the product that you're trying to build. If it is, what's the point of building exactly the same thing? Try to build something new, something that is going to actually make a difference. So if you found that space and you're very convinced, I mean, I think you should do it. Try to do it. Again, we've spoken about it during this podcast. Nowadays, it's the best of times to become an entrepreneur. You have so many great tools out there. If you don't have a founder, you can almost use ChatGPT as a co-founder. You can go to ChatGPT and just dump your brain and ask him or it to debunk your idea and really play the devil's advocate to your project. And I think you will learn so much, right? Having this free consultancy from ChatGPT. That again, just try to validate your thesis in a very scrappy way. Don't overcommit time and resources that you don't have to a project that might fail. We have been through this in the podcast, and especially try to keep yourself distanced from the idea, which is a mistake that after so many years we still see people doing so many times, right? I mean, people are still very much into this love story, romantic affair with their idea, which is kind of a crazy thing to have if you are an entrepreneur. You should love the problem, not the solution, as they say.
I want to add a piece of advice, I think, related to that, which is there are many theses out there. There are many ideas. You know, you don't have to just start with the first idea you came up with. And it's rarely, and I say this from evidence, working with entrepreneurs, it is rarely the idea that they came in thinking when we do coaching that is the idea they end up developing and validating to revenue. It's very rare. So there are lots of ideas out there. Awesome. Andre, where should people find you? We'll obviously share a link to Productized.
Sure.
Just tell us about that, the next conference.
So Productized conference is obviously a great place to meet the product community. So if you want to join us there, and Andre, I just heard that he will join us there this year as well. It's going to be your first time at Productized conference this year, right?
Yeah, I've never been to a product conference.
Great. So
it's a blind spot for me.
Long due. And that's obviously a great place to get together. But we organize the Productized talks. So we have one coming up in September. And that's also a great place to meet. It's a free meetup. I also tend to hang out at some of the product meetups organized by Gabriela at the Product Management Society here in Lisbon. So that's IRL. If you want to meet me online, obviously on LinkedIn. I think that's the best way for you to reach me. Just search for my name and I should pop up.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andre. But you've really got me thinking about my own journey, which I think is great. And I think there's lots of really valuable advice for others. Thank you so much for joining, and we should meet in person in the next few months.
Yes, absolutely. Let's have lunch one of these days.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Refounders. If you enjoyed this episode and want to get each shiny new episode straight to whatever platform you use to listen to your podcast, please subscribe using the subscribe button below. If you're feeling generous, why not share with a friend?